moving away from the madness, let's move a little bit to your MMA background. How did you get started in MMA? What was your first dealings in MMA? Basically, give us a rundown of what got you into the sport.
Wow, I mean, I started fighting back in 1996. My very first fight was in Amarillo, Texas, in a indoor rodeo arena, actually, out in Amarillo. And that back then they called it shoot fighting. It was with submissions, with the rope grabs, and all that good stuff. But that was really how I started off and got into it. And I really didn't have much formal training in it. Really just watching tapes and watching At that time, rings was really big in Japan, so we were watching a lot of rings videos. The UFC, of course, had just been around for a very short time. So it was definitely the Bush leagues back then, and it was a lot of fun though, growing up and doing all that. And then kind of from there, I moved on, started fighting pretty regularly. Usually about once a week, I would fight somewhere, at least a couple of times a month. Got the opportunity to go down to Aruba, down in the Caribbean, and fight down there in a couple of WVCs. And that was a lot of fun getting to do that, with the no gloves and no rules. You could headbutt and all that old stuff. So it's definitely been fun for me to see the progression of the sport. I think I'm one of the few guys left that's really fought back in those old, no time limit fights, no rules, no gloves, and I did it. Then I went overseas from there, went and fought in Russia, moved to the Netherlands, was actually one of the original guys in the Golden Glory team out in Holland. That's when we got signed up and started fighting in Pride. We fought in Pride till at least 2004, 2005. Then I went over to, did the little K1 stint when they tried their MMA, and then came over to the UFC in 2006.
Now, one of the chatters in our chat room, Arlovsky via TKO, wanted to know, he wanted to talk about your first fight with the late Evan Tanner.
Yeah, Evan, God, we had a couple of fights actually back in Texas. The very first one I think was in, I'm trying to remember which one was the first one, which one was the second one. I think the first one, we were actually fighting in Amarillo, and the shoot fights there, ended up having an asthma attack due to the fact that, it was, like I said, it was an indoor rodeo arena, so I think they had a rodeo literally like the day before, and this is a little known fact. I'm an asthmatic. I think a lot of people have seen me take my inhalers sometimes for my fights. And got out there, and about halfway through the fight, man, I just shut down. So it was a pretty bad fight. I had to forfeit, actually, on that one on asthma. And then I think we fought about a month later in, I think it was Dumas, Texas, which is another little small town. And ended up, he tried to put me in a triangle, and I picked him up and kind of did the slammed on his head and choked him out. So I guess I got my vengeance like a month later on that one.
How were you able to deal with the asthma? I have two brothers who are asthmatics, one who turned into a cross-country runner and the other one who's now a police officer.
Right.
How were you able to deal with, the at any time you could suddenly have problems breathing?
Well, and I even notice it now. I'm 32 years old. I think a lot of it, I was real fortunate as a young man in high school and stuff. My dad also, had asthma. And we went and talked to a lot of dietitians and things like that. I really do believe, your diet, what you eat, kind of trying to cut out alcohol and sugars. I think that just makes a huge, huge difference. Even more of a lot of the research that I've personally done, and reading on the internet and a lot of new things. I notice if I change my diet up where I'm eating a lot of like really high sugar foods or drinking alcohol, things like that, it's almost like an allergic. Your body, asthma is kind of like an allergic reaction that your body has where your bronchial tubes are actually closed down on you. So if you can reduce these outside allergens, which seem to be built up through digesting sugars and alcohol, it seems to actually really help out with the asthma and put it under control. And that's something that I noticed as I got older and I kind of watched my diet and got in a lot better shape, that my asthma was a lot more manageable and a lot more under control. And I very rarely have difficulty with it now.
Have you ever had a fight other than the aforementioned Tanner one where the asthma affected you negatively?
I had a few of them. Where I would get to the break or whatever, and I'd tell my corner to give me a shot of my albuterol, but I can't remember really any off the top of my head where it was a huge factor. I mean, that one really sticks out in my mind, but it was also because of the severity. I mean, I had to go get in the ambulance, and they had to give me a breathalyzer treatment and all that stuff. So that one definitely sticks out in my mind. But I know that I can think of a couple others where I was getting kind of tight and I was having a little bit of difficulty, but you're able to make it to the round or into the round, and you go grab a shot from your inhaler and get back in there.
Were you able to have an inhaler in the corner while during your fights?
Oh yeah, I always do actually.
Oh, okay. Because I remember one of the Olympics, one of the sprinters was either taking medication or something right before they went on, and the IOC had a little bit of a problem with that.
Well, actually, kind of interesting you bring that up. Dr. Voy, who's out here in Las Vegas, was actually one of the IOC head doctors for the IOC, and he was I think he was the chief doctor in the Sarajevo Olympics back in '88. Anyway, when I fought in California against Nogueira, a couple of years back now, California was actually really giving me hell. The athletic commission was giving me hell about me having my inhalers, and Dr. Voy, I was fortunate enough to have him really come to bat for me. And he actually did a whole study about whether or not there's any advantage gained by an albuterol inhaler with an asthmatic, and they really did come to the determination that there is no advantage given to the asthmatic over a non-asthmatic with the inhaler. And anyway, I was real fortunate to have him come to bat for me with the athletic commission in California, and of course they had to kind of bow down to him and his authority on that issue. So we were able to use an inhaler in that fight.
To kind of take a sidetrack, you mentioned the California State Athletic Commission. Mm-hmm. Has it been, or do you see it as kind of difficult with having all the different rule sets with the different athletic commissions? Would it be? Do you think there should be a truly unified rule set?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think there needs to be a magnanimous, forum for MMA. I think, and really, I think right now what you are seeing is that the rules are getting pretty much universal at this point. And that has to be, so that the sport can grow and that it can be held, and and we need to really move towards a unification of where, who's a contender, who's holding the title. I think that you're going to start having that develop as opposed to just promoters being in charge of their own individual organization. I mean, the next step obviously has to be with some type of commission, one way or the other that oversees MMA as a whole.
We're talking to the Texas Crazy Horse, Heath Herring, here on Shambala Sports Radio. Certainly feel free to get your questions into the chat room while Heath is still with us. Heath, you fought for both Pride and the UFC. We've seen a lot of fighters make the transition over between the two promotions with mixed results. What do you think, first and foremost, the biggest difference between the two promotions are? And secondly, what do you think has caused some of the struggles of guys like a Mirko Cro Cop, who was absolutely dominant in the Pride and looked kind of, let's call it what it is, pedestrian in the UFC?
Well, I mean, obviously the main differences are, just on culture alone. I mean, you're dealing with a Japanese organization as opposed to a U.S.-based organization. I mean, that in of itself is, night and day. For those that haven't ever, been overseas, I mean, it's a completely different world in Japan. And then as far as, the individual promotions, I think UFC, even when you saw BJ Penn first come over and fight George St. Pierre, that fight that he lost, I think for a lot of fighters in Japan, it's really hard for us to grasp the judging system, for one. Also obviously the difference between fighting in a cage and a ring. I think that's, for some guys it's more difficult than for others. And then obviously, I think the UFC with the rules right now, I think it really really heavily favors wrestlers. I think they really favor the takedown, and I think you see that it takes a lot away from strikers due to the fact that they realize that the takedown is scored so heavily here in the UFC, where a takedown wasn't scored as heavily, I think, at Pride at the time. If a guy was to take you down, obviously he had a lot more to contend with the knees to the head and with the soccer kicks, as opposed to here in the States, where the rules really do heavily favor a straight wrestler. I mean, there's really no downside to taking a bad shot. Even if you take a bad shot, other than someone kind of getting you in a head and arm choke or anaconda or guillotine, they don't have to worry about really a whole barrage of strikes to the head, especially even to the back of the head. So for a wrestler, I think it definitely is in their it behooves them actually to fight here in the States as opposed to the old rules in Japan.